No one understood the Russian Mafia boss until the waitress replied in Russian and shocked everyone. Before we dive into the story, tell me where in the world you're watching from. And if this story steals your heart, please hit subscribe. The air inside L'Orangerie always felt thinner than the air outside on the Manhattan streets, as if the oxygen had been refined, scented with truffle oil and aged cognac, and reserved solely for the lungs of the city's financial predators and social elite. Alyssa Petrova moved through the gilded dining room like a ghost in a black waistcoat, her auburn hair pulled back so severely it ached, her green eyes lowered in perpetual deference. She was good at being invisible. Invisibility was survival. For 3 years, she had polished her American accent until it was flat and nondescript, buried her memories of Moscow deep beneath layers of mundane waitress chatter, and lived a half-life defined by fear and the desperate need to remain unnoticed. She took an order for Wagyu beef from a hedge fund manager who didn't bother to look at her face, her hand steady as she wrote, even though the rent on her tiny Queens apartment was overdue and her shoes were worn thin. The atmosphere in the restaurant shifted instantly at 8 o'clock. It wasn't a subtle change. It was a sudden, collective inhalation, a vacuum of sound as conversation died at 20 tables simultaneously. Viktor Volkov had arrived. Alyssa froze near the sommelier station, clutching a silver water pitcher tightly to stop her hands from trembling. Everyone knew of Viktor Volkov. He was a specter that haunted the nightmares of the city's underworld, the Pakhin of the Russian Bratva's most powerful New York faction. He didn't look like a gangster from a movie. He looked like a titan carved from Siberian granite and dressed in Italian silk. He was towering, easily 6'4", with shoulders that strained the impeccable tailoring of his charcoal suit. His face was a brutal landscape of hard planes and sharp angles, dominated by eyes the color of a winter sky just before a blizzard, cold, gray, and utterly devoid of mercy. He walked to his usual corner table with a predatory grace that belied his size, flanked by 3 subordinates who radiated nervous energy. The maitre d', a man usually unflappable, was sweating through his collar as he seated them. Alyssa stayed back, praying it wasn't her section tonight. It wasn't. Sarah, a bubbly aspiring actress, took the table, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped the wine list. Victor didn't look at the menu. He ordered vodka, a specific, terribly expensive import that L'Orangerie kept in stock solely for him, and waved Sarah away without a glance. The dinner proceeded in agonizing silence. Victor's associates spoke in hushed, deferential tones, presenting proposals that Victor seemed to absorb without comment, his gaze fixed on some middle distance, his presence alone enough to suffocate the room. Then, his phone buzzed against the white tablecloth. Victor looked at the screen, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. His jaw tightened, a muscle ticking violently in his cheek. He snatched the phone up and answered. The voice on the other end was audible only as a frantic squeak. Victor listened for 10 seconds before he exploded. It wasn't a shout. It was a volcanic eruption of pure, lethal rage. He slammed his fist onto the table, causing fine crystal to jump and silverware to clatter, the sound cracking through the silent restaurant like a gunshot. He began speaking, snarling in rapid-fire Russian, the words pouring out of him in a torrent of guttural fury. It was the language of the gulags, of back-alley executions, a dialect so thick with violence and menace that even those who didn't understand the words understood the promise of death they carried. Tai idiot, yatibi skazel, chto ito daljno bite, estelano tiko. Esli oni uvidiat ito, my potrim ves contract ke zavdrishnemu utru. His subordinates shrank into their chairs, pale and trembling. The entire restaurant was paralyzed. Diners stared at their plates, terrified to breathe wrong. Sarah, caught in the middle of refilling water glasses at the adjacent table, looked ready to faint. Victor continued his tirade, his voice rising, demanding an impossible solution to a catastrophic failure, his gray eyes blazing with the intent to destroy whoever was on the other end of the line. Yakachu zinat, kto ito estelal, I yakachuik galavina moyam stol cheres chaz, ili ito budit tivoya galava, Boris. He paused for breath, the silence that followed heavier than the shouting. He needed a name, a location, something his incompetent underling couldn't provide. He was about to throw the phone across the room when a soft, clear voice cut through the tension. Oni ispolzuvali Yuzhny port, gospodin Volkov. Kontinur 4b Vasha informacija bila nevernoi, no je možno ispravit, jestli vi pozvanite 5 tamizhnu saches. The silence that fell over Eloringery now was absolute. It was the silence of a tomb. Alyssa stood near the table, the silver water pitcher still clutched in her hands. She hadn't meant to speak. It had been an instinct born of a lifetime spent navigating volatile men in a dangerous city, a reflexive need to defuse a bomb before it detonated. The Russian had flowed out of her before her brain could engage the filter she had painstakingly built over 3 years. She had understood his problem, a botched shipment, a customs issue based on bad intel, and she had instinctively offered the solution based on the snippets of information he'd roared into the phone. Slowly, terrifyingly, Viktor Volkov turned his head. His gray eyes slammed into hers with physical force. He looked at her not as a waitress, but as an anomaly, a glitch in his matrix. He stared at her for an eternity, his chest heaving slightly from his previous outburst. The sheer intensity of his focus made Alyssa feel naked, flayed open. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. What had she done? She had just exposed herself to the most dangerous man on the eastern seaboard. Victor lowered the phone slowly, never breaking eye contact. His voice, when he spoke, was terrifyingly quiet, a low rumble of tectonic plates shifting deep underground. Ktotai, he demanded in Russian. Who are you? Alyssa's mouth was dry as dust. She couldn't speak Russian now. If she did, she admitted everything, that she wasn't just an American waitress, that she understood the dark dialect of his world. She switched to English, her voice trembling, desperately trying to force the flat American accent back into place. I'm sorry, sir. I just overheard. My grandmother, she was Russian. She taught me a little when I was a child. I didn't mean to intrude. It was a pathetic lie. Her Russian hadn't been the halting words of a grandchild remembering nursery rhymes. It had been fluent, precise, and accented with the sophisticated clip of downtown Moscow. Victor stood up. He towered over her, his shadow consuming her. The scent of expensive leather, gunpowder, and cold air rolled off him. He stepped closer, invading her personal space until she had to crane her neck to look at him. He raised a large hand, and she flinched, expecting a blow. Instead, his knuckles grazed her cheekbone, a touch so unexpectedly gentle yet possessive that it sent a shockwave of confusing heat through her terrified body. You are a liar, he murmured in heavily accented English, his voice a low caress that sounded like a threat. Your accent is Muscovite, pure, educated. Please, she whispered, her green eyes wide with panic. I'm just a waitress, I made a mistake. Victor stared down at her, taking in the delicate curve of her jaw, the fear pulsing in her neck, the defiance deep in those soft green eyes that belied her submissive posture. He had spent a lifetime surrounded by people who feared him, people who wanted something from him, or people who wanted to kill him. He had never encountered anyone like her, someone hiding in plain sight, possessing the keys to his language and his world, yet serving Wagyu beef to idiots. He realized 2 things simultaneously. The shipping crisis was solved because her information felt instinctively correct, and he was absolutely not going to let this woman walk out of this restaurant and disappear back into the woodwork. He turned to his terrified subordinates. Fix the shipment, use her information, get out. They scrambled away like cockroaches when the lights turned on. Victor turned back to Alyssa, who was looking for an escape route. When does your shift end? He asked. It wasn't a question, it was a demand for logistical data. In an hour, sir. Please, I need this job. You have a new job, Victor said, turning and signaling for the check that no one would dare bring him. And you are finished here. I will wait outside. An hour later, Alyssa emerged from the service entrance into the damp, grimy alley behind the restaurant, praying Victor had lost interest, that a bigger crisis had pulled him away. The November air was biting, cutting through her thin coat. She took 2 steps toward the street and froze. A sleek, black-armored SUV sat idling at the mouth of the alley, its exhaust plumbing white in the cold air. Leaning against the rear door, looking like a dark prince surveying a particularly disappointing kingdom, was Viktor Volkov. He didn't say a word. He simply opened the rear door and gestured with a nod for her to get in. The implied threat was clear. Get in the car, or he would make a scene right here that she wouldn't survive. Her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, Alyssa obeyed, sliding onto the rich black leather interior. Viktor climbed in beside her, and the door sealed with a heavy, decisive thud, shutting out the sounds of the city. The ride to his penthouse was suffocating. Viktor stared straight ahead, his massive frame dominating the space, radiating a kinetic energy that made the hair on Alyssa's arms stand up. She pressed herself against the opposite door, clutching her worn purse like a shield. He didn't speak until the elevator opened directly into his penthouse foyer, revealing a sprawling space of polished marble, minimalist Italian furniture, and a floor-to-ceiling glass wall overlooking the glittering expanse of Central Park and the Manhattan skyline. It was a fortress of obscene wealth, cold and imposing as its master. "Coat," Viktor demanded, holding out a hand. Alyssa surrendered her threadbare jacket, feeling absurdly vulnerable in her uniform of black trousers and a white shirt. He hung it in a closet larger than her entire bathroom and led her into the living area, pouring 2 glasses of amber liquid from a crystal decanter. He handed her one. "Drink, it will stop the shaking." She took the glass but didn't drink. "What do you want with me, Mr. Volkov? I told you it was a mistake. I'm nobody." Viktor took a slow sip of his whiskey, his gray eyes pinning her to the spot. "Nobody speaks the dialect of the central Moscow districts with such flawless precision, Alyssa. Nobody knows the shipping codes of the southern ports unless they have been trained to know them. You are not nobody. You are a loose end, and I do not tolerate loose ends." He began to circle her slowly, like a wolf assessing wounded prey. The predatory grace of his movement was mesmerizing and terrifying. "You humiliated my men. You showed them that a little waitress knows more about their business than they do. You think they won't talk. By tomorrow, half the city will know that Viktor Volkov has a secret weapon hidden in a restaurant." Alyssa felt the blood drain from her face. "I didn't mean to." "Intent is irrelevant. Consequences are everything." He stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body, smell the intoxicating blend of whiskey and danger clinging to him. His voice dropped to that low, vibrating rumble that seemed to bypass her ears and resonate directly in her core. "Who are you hiding from, Melnkaya?" The endearment, "little one," was shocking in its intimacy, a stark contrast to his brutal demeanor. It sent a treacherous shiver down her spine. "I cannot go back," she whispered, the truth leaking out before she could stop it. "Please just let me go. I won't say anything. I'll leave the city." "No," the word was absolute. "You are too valuable to be left wandering around and too dangerous to be left alive if you are working for my enemies. You need protection. You need money. I can see it in your shoes, in the way you eye the bread baskets before you take them away." Alyssa flushed with shame, instinctively curling her toes in her worn-out flats. He saw everything. "I have a proposition," Viktor continued, his eyes tracing the delicate line of her throat. "You will work for me, my personal translator, my assistant. You will handle communications that are too sensitive for the idiots I employ. You will live here where I can see you." "Live here," Alyssa gasped. "No, I can't." "It is not a request." He stepped closer, placing a hand on the wall beside her head, boxing her in. The sheer, overwhelming masculinity of him was intoxicating. "Outside of these walls, you are prey. Your little performance tonight guaranteed that. If my enemies find you first, they will torture you to get to me. If my own men decide you're a liability, they will kill you to curry favor. Here, you are untouchable." "Because I would belong to you," she challenged, finding a spark of her old courage. Viktor's eyes darkened, the storm within them swirling. He leaned in, his mouth inches from hers. "Yes, you would belong to me. Is that so terrible a fate compared to starving in Queens, waiting for a bullet?" The temptation was staggering. Not just the safety, not just the wealth, but him. The raw, magnetic pull of his strength was unlike anything she had ever experienced. He was a monster, yes, but he was offering to be her monster. "What if I say no?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Victor's thumb traced her lower lip, a touch that burned like fire. "You won't say no, Alyssa, because you are a survivor, and survivors know when to take the hand that pulls them out of the drowning water, even if that hand is covered in blood." He stepped back, breaking the spell, leaving her breathless and reeling. "Your room is down the hall, second on the left. It has clothes that will fit you. Tomorrow, your life begins again." He turned and walked towards his office, assuming her compliance. Alyssa stood alone in the cavernous living room, the city lights glittering below like fallen stars. She looked at the whiskey in her hand, then at the hallway leading to an unknown future. She was terrified. She was trapped. And God help her, she was thrillingly, dangerously alive for the first time in years. She took a drink of the burning liquid and walked toward the hallway. 3 weeks transformed Alyssa's existence from gray survival to high-definition Technicolor danger. Living in Victor's penthouse was like living inside a dormant volcano, luxurious, awe-inspiring, and constantly threatening to erupt. She was good at the job, better than Victor had anticipated. She navigated the complex, coded language of the Bratva with an innate understanding that cemented his suspicions about her background. She softened his communications without diluting his authority, translating his barbaric rages into icy, irrefutable commands that his captains obeyed without question. Yet the proximity was torture. Victor was a constant, brooding presence. He watched her with an intensity that made her skin burn. He was possessive, demanding to know her movements, scowling when she spoke to anyone else, even the housekeeper. There were moments, late nights when they worked over encrypted files, glasses of scotch forgotten on the desk, when the air between them thickened with unspoken desires. He would lean close to read a document over her shoulder, his breath stirring her hair, and she would have to physically restrain herself from leaning back into his solid warmth. But Victor held back. He was a man of iron discipline, and he seemed determined not to cross that final line, perhaps fearing that if he touched her, he would crush her, or perhaps fearing that if he let her in, he would never be able to let her go. The bubble burst on a Tuesday. Victor had sent her to her old apartment in Queens, accompanied by a driver, to retrieve the few sentimental items she had left behind: a photo of her mother, a locket. She told the driver to wait outside the crumbling brick building. The hallway smelled of cabbage and old damp. She unlocked her door, and the scent hit her instantly, stale cigarette smoke and cheap cologne. It wasn't hers. Alyssa turned to run, but the blow caught her hard on the temple, sending her crashing into the flimsy drywall. Stars exploded behind her eyes. Through the haze of pain, she saw him, Kirill. He was a ghost from Moscow, a sadistic enforcer for the Petrov Syndicate, the family her father had betrayed before fleeing to America. He was grinning, his gold teeth glinting in the dim light. "Little bird," Kirill spat in Russian, grabbing a fistful of her hair and dragging her to her feet. "We heard rumors. Viktor Volkov has a new pet with a Moscow accent. Your father died owing us a great deal of money. We thought his debts died with him, but here you are, playing house with our rival." He backhanded her, splitting her lip. Alyssa tasted copper. "Where is Volkov's private ledger kept? Tell me, and maybe I'll make it quick." The door splintered inward with a deafening crash. Victor stood in the frame. He didn't look human. He looked like the avatar of death itself. His suit jacket was gone, his shirt sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms thick with muscle and scarred tattoos. His face was a rigid mask of pure, unadulterated murder. Kirill didn't even have time to draw his weapon. Victor moved with terrifying speed, a blur of violence. He slammed Kirill against the opposite wall, the impact cracking the plaster. The sound of breaking bone echoed in the small room. Victor didn't stop. It was a release of weeks of pent-up tension, a visceral reaction to seeing Alyssa bleeding. He beat the man until Kirill was unconscious, a broken heap on the linoleum floor. Victor stopped only when Alyssa whimpered. He turned, his chest heaving, his knuckles split and bleeding. The feral rage in his eyes slowly receded as he looked at her, replaced by a horrific dawn of realization at what she had just witnessed. He stepped over the body and scooped her up as if she weighed nothing, shielding her face against his chest so she wouldn't have to see the carnage. "I've got you," he growled into her hair, his voice shaking slightly. "I've got you, Melnkaya." Back at the penthouse, he bypassed the staff and carried her straight to his master bathroom, setting her gently on the marble counter. He retrieved a first aid kit, his large hands, so capable of destruction moments ago, now incredibly gentle as he cleaned the cut on her lip and checked her head for concussion. Alyssa sat shivering, the adrenaline crashing. She looked at his hands, stained with another man's blood because of her. "Why?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "Why did you come yourself? You could have sent men." Victor stopped cleaning the wound. He looked into her eyes, his own defenses shattered by the violence and the fear of losing her. "Because he touched what is mine." The admission hung in the steam-filled air. He dropped the cotton swab and placed his hands on either side of her hips on the counter, trapping her. "Tell me the truth, Alyssa, all of it now." She was too tired, too battered to lie anymore. "My name is Alyssa Ivanova. My father was Alexei Ivanov. He was the accountant for the Petrov family in Moscow. He skimmed from them for years, tried to buy our way out. They found out. We ran. He died of a heart attack 6 months after we got here. I've been hiding ever since." Victor closed his eyes briefly. The Petrovs, his oldest, bitterest rivals in the old country. "You are the daughter of a traitor to the Bratva." "Yes," she whispered, waiting for him to recoil to see her as the enemy. Instead, Victor reached up and unbuttoned his shirt, pulling it open to reveal his chest. It was a tapestry of scars, knife wounds, bullet grazes, burn marks. But right over his heart was a brand, a faded, puckered scar in the shape of an Orthodox cross. "My family did not betray anyone," Victor said, his voice devoid of inflection, which made it all the more terrifying. "But a rival faction wanted our territory. They came in the night when I was 16. They made me watch as they slaughtered my parents and my 2 little sisters. Then they branded me and left me for dead, a warning to others." Alyssa gasped, her hand instinctively reaching out to hover over the terrible scar over his heart. "I survived," Victor said, covering her hand with his own, pressing her palm against the beat of his heart. "And I vowed I would never be weak again. I shut everything off. I became the monster they feared." He looked deep into her eyes, a vulnerability there that no one else had ever seen. "Until you spoke in that restaurant, until you looked at me and didn't flinch." He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. She leaned forward, meeting him halfway. His lips were demanding, tasting of copper and desperation. It was a kiss of shared trauma, of 2 broken people recognizing the jagged edges in each other. He lifted her off the counter, wrapping her legs around his waist, carrying her into his bedroom. There was no more holding back. The discipline was gone, replaced by a raw, urgent need to possess and be possessed, to find oblivion in each other's arms, if only for a night. Waking up in Victor's bed felt like waking up in the eye of a hurricane, peaceful, terrifying, and temporary. The sheets smelled of sandalwood and his own musk. Alyssa stretched, her body aching in places that made her blush, the memory of Victor's fierce, almost desperate lovemaking flooding back. They were no longer just boss and assistant. They had crossed a Rubicon of blood and shared secrets. Victor had claimed her completely, body and soul, and Alyssa, against all her survival instincts, had surrendered. For a few weeks, they lived in a dangerous bubble of happiness. Victor was still ruthless in business, but with Alyssa, he was different, attentive, protective to the point of obsession, and surprisingly tender in the quiet hours of the night. He showered her with gifts she didn't want, diamond jewelry, haute couture clothing, as if trying to armor her with his wealth. But Alyssa felt the shadows lengthening. Her presence at Victor's side was no longer a secret, and her true identity as Alexei Ivanov's daughter was a ticking time bomb. Victor's organization began to fray at the edges. Shipments were intercepted with uncanny accuracy. Warehouses were torched. Key political contacts suddenly stopped returning Victor's calls. The attacks were precise, designed not just to inflict damage, but to humiliate. It was Dmitry Petrov, the new head of the Moscow family that Alyssa's father had betrayed. He had taken over after the old Don died, and he was younger, hungrier, and crueler than his predecessors. He hated Victor for holding the New York territory that the Petrovs coveted, and now he had a personal vendetta. Alyssa sat in Victor's home office, translating intercepted comms, dread coiling in her stomach. The chatter was increasing. They were talking about the accountant's whore and how she was Volkov's weak link. Victor entered the office, looking exhausted. He had been out all night dealing with the aftermath of a dockside explosion that cost them millions. He walked straight to her chair, spun it around, and buried his face in her stomach, his strong arms wrapping around her waist. "They are hurting you because of me," Alyssa whispered, stroking his dark, short-cropped hair. Victor looked up, his gray eyes fierce. "They are hurting me because they cannot touch you, and they never will. I promised you safety, Alyssa. I keep my promises." "But at what cost, Victor? Your captains are restless. I see the way they look at me. They think I've made you soft. They think I'm a liability." "They are idiots who only understand brute force," Victor snarled, standing up and packing. "They don't see the bigger picture." "Dmitri does," she countered quietly. "He knows that as long as I am here, I am a distraction. You're fighting a defensive war, Victor. That's not you. You attack, you dominate." The phone on his desk rang, the secure line. Victor answered, put it on speaker. The voice that filled the room was smooth, cultured, and dripping with venom. It was Dmitri Petrov. "Victor, my old friend. The docks were unfortunate, yes, so messy." "State your business, Dmitri, before I hang up and start sending pieces of your Brighton Beach crew back to Moscow in envelopes." Dmitri laughed, a cold, dry sound. "Always so dramatic. Let's get to the point. You have something of mine, the Ivanova girl. Her father died owing my family a significant debt. She inherited it." Victor's hand tightened on the back of Alyssa's chair until his knuckles turned white. "She is mine, Dmitri. Come and take her if you think you can." "Oh, I don't want her, Victor. She's damaged goods. But I want what she represents, and I want my territory. Here is the offer. You cede control of the Jersey ports to me by Friday at noon. Full control. And I will forget the girl exists. Her debt is canceled." "And if I refuse?" Victor asked, his voice deceptively calm. "Then at 12:01 on Friday, I release the full dossier on Alexei Ivanov and his charming daughter to the FBI, ICE, and the Russian Federal Security Service. They will be very interested to know where she is hiding. You can protect her from bullets, Victor, but can you protect her from international warrants? They will lock her away in a federal hole, and you will never see her again." The line went dead. Silence stretched in the office, thick and suffocating. The price had been named. Victor's empire or Alyssa's freedom. Alyssa stood up, her legs shaking. "You have to give him the ports, Victor." Victor slammed his fist onto the desk. "No, if I give him the ports, I look weak. If I look weak, my own men will tear me apart and then they will come for you anyway. Dmitri will not stop at Jersey. He wants everything." "Then let me go," she begged, tears finally spilling over. "If I disappear again, he has no leverage." Victor grabbed her shoulders, shaking her slightly. "Never. Do you understand me? Never. I would burn this entire city to ash before I let you go back to the shadows." He pulled her into a crushing embrace, holding on to her as if she were the only solid thing in a disintegrating world. He was a man trapped. His absolute power, the thing that had defined his entire existence since he was 16, was now the very thing endangering the woman he loved. He pulled back, cupping her face, his gray eyes hard with a new resolve. "We cannot win this here. He is right. We are on the defensive." "What are we going to do?" Victor looked out the window at the city he ruled, a kingdom under siege. "We are going to stop running. We are going to Moscow." Moscow in December was a world of grayscale, white snow, gray sky, black stone buildings. The cold was a physical assault, biting through the layers of cashmere and wool Victor had swathed Alyssa in. They had arrived via a private jet, slipping into the country through airfields paid to look the other way. They were staying in a safe house on the outskirts of the city, a dacha that belonged to one of the few remaining old guard bosses who still respected Victor's father. The plan was madness. Victor was walking directly into the lion's den, onto turf Dmitri had controlled for years. But Victor knew that Dmitri's arrogance was his weakness. Dmitri felt untouchable here, safe in his fortress of power. He wouldn't expect Victor to leave his New York stronghold unguarded to launch a decapitation strike on Russian soil. For 2 days, Victor was gone, meeting with shadowy figures, calling in debts that were decades old. Alyssa sat in the dacha, surrounded by armed guards who spoke no English, her anxiety mounting with every passing hour. On the 3rd night, Victor returned, his face grim. It is set. Dmitri is hoarding cash and assets in an old Soviet munitions warehouse in the industrial district, preparing for the expansion into Jersey. He will be there tonight to inspect the final transfer. He began strapping on a Kevlar vest over his thermal shirt. He looked at Alyssa. You stay here. If I don't return by dawn, Boris has instructions to get you to Helsinki. Alyssa stood up. No. Victor froze. What did you say? I said no. I'm coming with you. Alyssa, this is not a negotiation. It's a war zone. And it's a war zone I know better than you do, she replied, her voice steady despite her pounding heart. She stepped forward, placing her hands on his armored chest. That warehouse district, my father used to audit those places. The main roads are watched, but there's a maze of old utility tunnels underneath, leftover from the Cold War. They connect the heating plants to the warehouses. Dmitri won't be watching those. Victor stared at her. He saw the fear in her green eyes, but he also saw the steel spine that had kept her alive for 3 years on her own. She was no longer just the woman he protected. She was his partner. Show me on the map, he commanded. The utility tunnels were a nightmare of dripping pipes, rats, and suffocating darkness. The air was thick with the smell of rust and decay. Victor led the way, his team of 6 elite mercenaries behind him, Alyssa right at his back, guided by her memory of her father's old blueprints. They emerged through a grate in the floor of the warehouse's vast main storage area. The cavernous space was dimly lit, stacks of wooden crates forming towering aisles. In the center, under a harsh floodlight, stood Dmitri Petrov, surrounded by open briefcases piled high with American dollars and euros. He was laughing with 2 of his lieutenants. Victor didn't hesitate. He signaled his men. The firefight was sudden, deafening, and brief. Victor's team, utilizing the element of surprise and superior angles, dropped Dmitri's guards in seconds. Alyssa pressed herself against a cold concrete pillar, hands over her ears as the roar of automatic gunfire filled the space. When the shooting stopped, Dmitri was alone, standing amidst the bodies of his men and the scattered money. He held a pistol, but Victor already had his weapon trained on the center of Dmitri's forehead. It's over, Dmitri, Victor said, his voice echoing in the sudden silence. Dmitri looked wild, cornered, but he sneered. You think this ends it, Volkov? You kill me, another rises. The Petrov family is eternal. The family, perhaps, but you, Victor cocked his head. You are just a man who got greedy. Victor took a step forward. This was the moment. The reckoning. The old Victor, the branded boy who vowed never to be weak, would put a bullet in Dmitri's brain and leave him as a warning. That was the way of their world. Blood for blood. Alyssa stepped out from behind the pillar. Victor. His name, spoken softly in that cavernous space, stopped him. He didn't look away from Dmitri, but she knew he was listening. Don't, she said, walking slowly toward him, ignoring the gun Dmitri still waved weakly. If you kill him like this, nothing changes. You're just the monster they made you. We will always be running, always looking over our shoulders for the next avenger. He threatened you, Victor snarled, the rage warring with something else in his eyes. Yes, and you beat him, look at him. She gestured to Dmitri, who looked pathetic now, surrounded by the ruins of his ambition. He's broken, but if you kill him, you break something in yourself, something we just started to fix. She reached Victor's side and put her hand over his, the one holding the gun. The metal was hot from the recent firing. Show him that you are not just stronger than him, Victor. Show him you are smarter, better. We don't need his blood to be safe. Victor looked at her. In the harsh light of the warehouse, with gunpowder smoke stinging the air, she looked beautiful and impossibly brave. He saw the future in her eyes, a future that wasn't just about survival, but about living. He slowly lowered the gun. Dmitri let out a shaky breath, a smirk beginning to form. Weakness, Volkov. It will kill Y. Victor moved with blinding speed. He didn't shoot. He stepped in and delivered a crushing kick to Dmitri's knee, shattering the joint backward. Dmitri screamed and collapsed into the pile of money. Victor stood over him. I am not going to kill you, Dmitri. That is too easy. Instead, Alyssa and I are going to take this money, all of it. And then I am going to give the encryption keys for your entire European laundering operation, which my brilliant partner found on your servers to Interpol. By tomorrow morning, you will have no money, no organization, and every police force on the continent hunting you. You will live, Dmitri. You will live as a nobody, poor and afraid. Just like you tried to make her. He turned away from the whimpering man on the floor. He took Alyssa's hand, his grip firm and warm. Let's go home, Alyssa, Victor said, leading her toward the exit, away from the darkness and the cold, towards a future they would build together, not on a foundation of corpses, but on power, loyalty, and love.